What if the most powerful words Jesus ever spoke were never accurately translated into any language you were given to read? What if the sacred Aramaic codes he used to activate divine consciousness were deliberately stripped from Scripture and replaced with doctrines engineered to keep you spiritually dependent and permanently controllable? These were not passive prayers. They were living frequency transmissions encoded in ancient sound, designed to dissolve the archon matrix that has enclosed the human soul for 2 millennia. The Gnostics understood this with devastating clarity, and entire libraries were burned to silence them. Their teachers were hunted, their texts were destroyed, and the original Aramaic knowledge was buried beneath centuries of enforced obedience and institutional religion. But the fire they tried to extinguish never died, because it has been burning inside you all along. Today, what was hidden comes fully into the light, and you will never hear the name Jesus the same way again. For thousands of years, a question has burned at the heart of every genuine seeker. Why does existence feel like a cage with walls no one can see? The Gnostic tradition gave an answer so threatening to established power that it was systematically hunted, burned, and buried beneath the rubble of official religion. According to these ancient teachers, the material world was not fashioned by the supreme divine intelligence. It was constructed by lower cosmic forces they called archons, entities whose entire dominion over humanity depends on one thing alone: your ignorance of what you truly are. Within every human being burns a fragment of the original divine fire. The Gnostics called this the pneuma, the sacred inner spark that no archon and no false doctrine can ever extinguish. Jesus understood this with a precision that institutional religion was never built to contain. In the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas, deliberately excluded from the official canon, he delivered words that were not comfort but confrontation. He taught that if you bring forth what is within you, it will save you, and if you fail to bring it forth, it will destroy you. These words were aimed not at the crowd, but at the soul itself, at the living intelligence buried beneath every layer of archon conditioning placed over your awareness. This was not a metaphor about moral virtue or religious compliance. This was a precise transmission about the nature of the human being, that inside every person lives a sacred inheritance of divine consciousness that predates the material world and cannot be owned by any earthly authority. The Gnostic path begins precisely here. Liberation does not arrive from the outside. It is not granted by a priest, a sacrament, or any institution claiming authority over your connection to the divine source. Liberation erupts from within, from the sacred chamber of your own awakening consciousness. Jesus pointed his followers inward, always inward, to the inexhaustible divine fire that is their birthright and their original nature. That fire was never meant to be sealed inside stone temples or controlled by institutional doctrine. It was encoded to burn freely within you. His most profound teachings were buried not because they disturbed society, but because they were a lethal threat to every system of power ever built upon your continued spiritual dependency. The Gnostic cosmology opens with a revelation that was considered so subversive it had to be erased from public memory. The world you inhabit was not created by the supreme divine source. It was fashioned by the demiurge, a false creator, and maintained by archons, lower intelligences described in the ancient Nag Hammadi texts as cosmic administrators of human ignorance. Their purpose is singular and relentless: to ensure that you never remember your divine origin. They accomplish this not through brute force alone, but through something far more efficient: the architecture of the human mind itself, shaped from birth to look outward and never within. Jesus stood in direct opposition to this system. The Nag Hammadi Library, discovered in Egypt in 1945, preserved texts recording his actual teachings, not teachings about submission to distant authority, but about Gnosis, the direct and personal knowledge of the divine that shatters the archon grip entirely. The Gospel of Philip, among these recovered texts, declares that ignorance is the mother of all evil, and that inner knowing is what sets the soul free. Jesus did not preach devotion to an external God separated from you by layers of institutional religion. He transmitted an activating awareness of the living divine presence already inhabiting every human being without exception. This is precisely why the Council of Nicaea in 325 CE excluded these texts from the official canon. The archon system requires obedience, not awakening. Gnostic communities were labeled heretics. Their texts were burned. Their teachers were silenced. The knowledge of the inner kingdom that Jesus actually transmitted was replaced by doctrines of original sin, external authority, and spiritual gatekeeping. The archon matrix does not fear your prayers. It fears the moment you realize the source you are praying to already lives inside you. And that singular realization is what required 2,000 years of suppression to contain. But fire buried beneath stone does not die. What Jesus revealed did not perish with the burning of Alexandria or the condemnation of the Gnostic schools. It survived because it was never stored in a text alone. It was stored in you. If these Gnostic teachings are awakening a desire for inner transformation within you, I left a gift for you in the comments to help you discover the beginning of this path. Jesus did not speak in Latin or Greek. He spoke Aramaic, an ancient Semitic language in which the boundary between the sacred and the physical dissolves entirely. Every word Jesus spoke in his native tongue carried multiple simultaneous layers of meaning, not as metaphor but as actual vibrational dimensions encoded in the sounds themselves. The Gnostics understood that his language was not incidental to his transmission. The language was the transmission, and at the heart of that living transmission was one sacred Aramaic word that dismantles the entire archon narrative of who you are and where the divine resides. That word is ABWOON. In the Aramaic spoken by Jesus, ABWOON opens the prayer the Western tradition calls the Lord's Prayer. But the conventional translation, Our Father, is a profound reduction of its actual depth and power. Scholar and mystic Neil Douglas Klotz, who spent decades studying the original Aramaic texts, reveals that ABWOON carries within its syllables the concept of a divine creative source that vibrates existence into being from within. A birther of universes, a cosmic mother-father intelligence breathing through all of creation simultaneously. It does not point toward an external patriarch enthroned above you. It points directly inward, toward the divine creative force already animating your every breath. This is what the archon system could not permit to spread. If the opening word of the most widely repeated prayer Jesus ever taught is actually a declaration of inner divine creative power, an invocation not to a distant God, but to the living source already vibrating inside you, then the entire architecture of spiritual dependency collapses instantly. Every institution built upon the gap between you and the divine is undone by the true meaning of a single sacred Aramaic syllable. When Jesus spoke ABWOON, he was not performing religious formality. He was activating the soul's memory of its own origin, recalling every person present to the truth that the source of all creation breathes from within them, not above them, not beyond them, but at the very center of their living existence. The archon matrix does not operate only through external institutions. Its most effective instrument is interior, the false self, the constructed persona that mistakes its social mask for the totality of what you are. Jesus confronted this directly in one of the most misread teachings in the entire Gnostic record. He declared that whoever seeks to preserve their life will lose it, and whoever loses their life for the sake of the truth will find what is truly real. This was not a call to physical martyrdom. It was an exact description of the inner process that every genuine spiritual awakening demands of the soul. The Gnostics grasped this teaching with a depth the mainstream tradition never retained. They understood that the ego, the constructed identity assembled from fear, social conditioning, and the false narrative of the archon system, is itself the primary prison. As long as you identify with your name, your wounds, your role, and your fear, you remain held within the matrix. Jesus was not preaching religious self-denial in the sense of performing sacrifice before an external God. He was pointing toward a radical dissolution of the false self, what the Gnostics called the konoma, the hollow emptiness of the constructed ego, so that the pleroma, the fullness of divine consciousness, could finally flow freely through the awakened human being. The same principle echoes across every authentic mystical tradition that survived the archon suppression. In Sufism, the ego must be annihilated before union with the divine becomes possible. In Vedanta, the dissolution of the false sense of separate self is the very threshold of liberation. In Zen, the student sits until the constructed identity collapses and original awareness stands revealed. Jesus was not isolated from these ancient streams of wisdom. He was their living synthesis, carrying the universal transmission of the mystery schools into the streets of first-century Palestine. The crucifixion, understood through Gnostic eyes, was not primarily a historical event of substitutionary atonement. It was the sacred symbol of the ego's death. The resurrection was the emergence of the pneuma, the divine inner fire rising freely after the false self has finally released its grip on the soul. If this teaching is stirring something in your heart and you wish to explore it further, we prepared a guide that explains the first sacred words where the journey begins. There, you will also find my advanced ebooks exploring their layers of meaning and the transformation they carry. The link is pinned in the comments. Jesus knew something that the archon system has always worked to prevent humanity from discovering. The material and the divine are not opposites locked in permanent conflict. They are two expressions of a single sacred reality, waiting to be unified within the conscious human being. In the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas, he encoded this mystery with absolute precision. He taught that when you make two into one, when you bring the interior and the exterior into true alignment, you enter the kingdom. This was not poetic language. This was a technical transmission about the mechanics of spiritual awakening. The unification of opposites runs beneath every great wisdom tradition that survived the archon suppression. The alchemists of the medieval period spoke of the conjunctio, the sacred marriage of opposites, as the core process of genuine inner transformation. The Kabbalists described tikkun, the restoration of divine balance within the soul, as the fundamental purpose of human existence on earth. The Taoist tradition teaches the dynamic unity of yin and yang as the master key to living in harmony with reality. Jesus was drawing from the same universal well, expressing through the sacred Aramaic word abun, a truth that every authentic spiritual path has always carried. The source does not exist outside the created world in opposition to it. It breathes through both poles simultaneously, waiting for the human being to recognize the unity beneath the apparent division. What the archon matrix profits from most is the illusion of separation, the illusion that you are separated from God, that the sacred is separated from the mundane, and that your divine nature is separated from your daily life. The moment that illusion dissolves, the matrix loses its grip entirely. Jesus taught that the kingdom is not a destination reached after death. It is the state of consciousness that erupts when the false division between inner and outer, above and below, spirit and matter, is finally resolved within the awakened soul. The Aramaic word ABWOON carries this unifying frequency in its very syllables. Spoken with awareness of its true meaning, it resonates the recognition of a divine creative force that holds both the cosmos and the individual soul in a single, unbroken field of living intelligence. The same intelligence Jesus spent his entire ministry inviting humanity to remember. For thousands of years, the true teachings of Jesus were not lost. They were buried by councils, condemned by institutions, and hidden from the very people they were meant to liberate. But the Gnostic tradition preserved what the archon system tried to erase, and those ancient transmissions are now reaching you in this moment, which means, in the deepest sense, they were always meant for you. The path that Jesus walked and taught was not a path of religious obedience to external authority. It was the path of Gnosis, direct, living, personal knowledge of the divine that exists within you as the pneuma, the sacred inner spark that no archon has ever been able to touch. He taught that the kingdom of God is not a place beyond death, but a state of consciousness accessible here and now, ignited through the dissolution of the false self and the recognition of the living fire encoded in your being. He spoke the sacred Aramaic word ABWOON, not as a prayer directed toward a distant god, but as a vibrational key, an activation of the soul's remembrance that the cosmic creative source breathes from within, not above. He taught that making two into one, unifying the inner and the outer, the material and the divine, is the very gateway into the kingdom. And he promised that the truth, when it is truly known rather than merely believed, sets you free in the most radical and complete sense possible. The Archon Matrix has spent 2 millennia convincing humanity that the divine is somewhere else, that you require an intermediary to access it, and that spiritual authority belongs to institutions rather than to the living soul. Jesus came to dismantle that lie entirely. Everything he transmitted, in the canonical texts, in the Gnostic Gospels, in the sacred Aramaic codes embedded in his original words, points to the same inescapable conclusion. The kingdom was never somewhere else. It was always within you, waiting to be remembered. Remember to visit my site to get your free Gnostic Awakening Guide. There you will also find my advanced ebooks for those ready to fully break the Archon Matrix and step into divine abundance. Everything you need is waiting for you. The link is right below. Get ready. In the next video, I will reveal more sacred Aramaic words that unlock deeper spiritual understanding. Turn on notifications so you don't miss it. Right now, before you close this video, come to the comments and tell us, what did you feel? What shifted? We read every single response. And if this teaching found you today, subscribe to this channel. Every week we go deeper into the ancient frequency codes that were always meant to be yours.